The morning started like any other Tuesday at the downtown courthouse. The old building, with its marble floors and high ceilings, was already filling up with people by 9 o'clock. Lawyers in expensive suits hurried past security checkpoints. Families of defendants sat nervously on wooden benches. Court reporters balanced coffee cups while juggling their equipment bags. The air conditioning struggled against the summer heat that was already making everyone uncomfortable. Detective Lisa Rodriguez had been working homicide cases for 12 years. She knew this courthouse like the back of her hand. Today wasn't about her cases, though. She was here to testify as a witness in a robbery trial, something routine that shouldn't take more than an hour. She wore plain clothes instead of her uniform, a simple navy blazer and slacks, nothing that screamed police officer. As Lisa walked down the third-floor corridor toward courtroom 3B, she noticed something odd. A small crowd had formed near the courtroom entrance. People were whispering and craning their necks to see what was happening. Lisa's instincts kicked in immediately. After more than a decade on the force, she could sense trouble before it fully developed. She moved closer and saw a young police officer standing in front of the courtroom doors. He couldn't have been more than 25 years old, fresh-faced with perfectly creased uniform pants and shoes so polished they reflected the fluorescent lights. His nameplate read Officer Thompson. Lisa didn't recognize him, which wasn't surprising. The department had hired dozens of new officers in recent months. The officer was blocking the doorway and he wasn't budging. In front of him stood a woman who looked to be in her late 30s. She wore a professional charcoal gray suit that fit perfectly, carried a leather briefcase that had seen some years of use, and had her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Everything about her appearance suggested she was an attorney, probably one of the many who passed through these halls every single day. But something felt different about this woman. Lisa noticed it right away. While most attorneys would be arguing loudly or making threats about contempt charges, this woman stood perfectly still. Her posture was straight, her face calm, almost serene. She wasn't shouting or making a scene. She simply looked at the officer with an expression that Lisa had seen before on the faces of people who possessed real authority. "I need you to step aside," the woman said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried down the hallway. Several people stopped what they were doing to watch. Officer Thompson's face flushed red. "Ma'am, I've already explained this to you 3 times. This courtroom is closed for a preliminary hearing. Nobody enters without proper authorization. You need to wait in the hallway with everyone else." The woman took a small step forward. "I'm not asking you, officer. I'm telling you to move." That's when things went wrong very quickly. Officer Thompson, perhaps feeling his authority was being challenged in front of an audience, made a decision that would change his life. He reached out with both hands and placed them firmly on the woman's shoulders. Then he pushed, hard. The woman stumbled backward, her briefcase nearly slipping from her hand. She caught herself before falling, but the damage was done. The hallway went completely silent. Even the usual background noise of the courthouse seemed to disappear. Lisa felt her stomach drop. She'd seen officers make bad decisions before, but this was different. There was something about the woman's complete lack of surprise, as if she'd expected this exact response, that made Lisa deeply uneasy. The woman regained her balance and straightened her jacket with one hand. She didn't look angry. She didn't look scared. If anything, she looked disappointed, like a teacher who'd just watched a student fail a test they should have passed easily. "Officer Thompson," she said quietly, and there was something in the way she said his name that made every person in that hallway hold their breath. Before she could say another word, the courtroom door burst open. The bailiff, a man in his 50s named Rodriguez who'd worked courthouse security for 20 years, came rushing out. His face had gone completely pale. His eyes were wide with something that looked like panic. "Your Honor." The bailiff's voice cracked slightly. "Your Honor, I am so sorry. I tried calling you, but..." The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped. "Your Honor. Not counselor. Not ma'am. Your Honor." Officer Thompson's expression changed from defensive to confused to absolutely horrified in the span of about 3 seconds. His hands, which had just pushed this woman, began to shake visibly. The color drained from his face so quickly that Lisa thought he might actually faint right there in the hallway. The woman, the judge, looked at the bailiff with a slight nod. "It's fine, Bill. I was running late from the security briefing downtown. Is everyone inside ready?" "Yes, Your Honor. All parties are present and waiting." The bailiff held the door open wide. his other hand gesturing respectfully for her to enter. Judge Rebecca Torres walked toward the courtroom entrance. Officer Thompson scrambled to move out of her way, pressing himself against the wall as if trying to disappear into it. As she passed him, she paused for just a moment. She didn't look angry. She didn't threaten him. She simply said, "We'll discuss this later." Then she walked into her courtroom and the door closed behind her. The hallway erupted. People who'd been silent moments before started talking all at once. Some pulled out their phones to text colleagues about what they'd just witnessed. Others just stood there with their mouths open, processing what had happened. Officer Thompson remained frozen against the wall. Sweat had broken out on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His hands were still shaking. Another officer, an older sergeant who'd come to check on him, approached and gently guided him away from the crowd. Lisa heard him asking Thompson if he was okay, but the young officer seemed unable to speak. Lisa checked her watch. She still had 15 minutes before she needed to be in her own courtroom. She watched as the sergeant led Officer Thompson down the hall toward an empty conference room. The younger officer's career might not survive this. She'd seen people fired for less, but something stuck with Lisa about the whole situation. The judge hadn't yelled. She hadn't threatened. She'd simply stated facts and walked away. That took a special kind of strength. Lisa had arrested people who'd assaulted police officers, and those suspects always seemed to know their actions would have consequences. But here was a judge who'd been physically pushed by an officer, and she'd maintained complete composure. No ego, no immediate retaliation, just professional dignity. As Lisa walked toward her own courtroom, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The story was probably already spreading through the building. By lunchtime, every lawyer, judge, and court employee would know about it. But what would the judge do? What would the department do? Would Officer Thompson lose his job over one terrible mistake? The courthouse continued its usual business around her, but Lisa knew that something significant had just happened in that hallway. Sometimes one moment, one bad decision, could change everything. She just hoped that whatever came next would be fair to everyone involved. Inside courtroom 3B, Judge Rebecca Torres walked up the 3 steps to her bench with the same steady pace she used every single day. She set her briefcase down, adjusted her robe, and took her seat in the high-backed leather chair. To anyone watching, she looked exactly like she always did. Calm, focused, professional. Nobody would have guessed that less than 2 minutes ago, a police officer had put his hands on her and shoved her in the hallway. The courtroom was packed. Every seat in the gallery was taken, and a few people stood along the back wall. This wasn't just any case. The trial involved 3 city council members accused of accepting bribes from a construction company. The local news had been covering it for months. Reporters sat in the front rows with their notebooks ready. Sketch artists had their pencils moving before the judge even sat down. "All rise," the bailiff announced, though everyone was already standing. Judge Torres looked out at the courtroom. "Please be seated. We're here for day 3 of the trial in the matter of the state versus Daniels and others. Before we bring in the jury, are there any matters counsel needs to address?" The lead prosecutor stood up, a woman in her 50s with gray streaks in her hair. "No, Your Honor. The state is ready to proceed." The defense attorney, a man who'd probably defended half the white-collar criminals in the city, rose next. "Defense is ready as well, Your Honor." "Good. Bailiff, please bring in the jury." As the 12 jurors filed into the courtroom and took their seats, Judge Torres reviewed her notes from the previous day. Her pen moved across the paper in quick, precise strokes. She showed no sign of distraction, no hint that anything unusual had happened outside her courtroom. Lisa Rodriguez, the detective who'd witnessed the hallway incident, had found a seat in the back of the courtroom. She wasn't supposed to be here. Her testimony was in a different courtroom down the hall. But she had 20 minutes to kill, and honestly, she couldn't help herself. She wanted to see how this judge would handle herself after what had just happened. What Lisa saw impressed her immediately. Judge Torres wasn't just going through the motions. She was sharp. When the prosecutor called her first witness, a forensic accountant who'd traced the money trail, Judge Torres asked questions that cut right to the heart of the testimony. She didn't let the lawyers use fancy language to confuse the jury. When the defense attorney objected to a line of questioning, the judge made her ruling clearly and explained her reasoning in plain English that everyone could understand. During one exchange, the defense attorney tried to introduce a document that hadn't been properly disclosed during discovery. He gave some elaborate explanation about why his office had only found it last week. Judge Torres didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him over her reading glasses and said, "Counselor, this is the third time you've attempted to introduce evidence that wasn't disclosed on time. The rules of discovery exist for a reason." Motion denied. The attorney tried to argue, but the judge held up one hand. "I've made my ruling. Move on to your next question." The man sat down, his face red with frustration. But the judge had been right, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. The rules were the rules, and she enforced them fairly. As the morning wore on, word about the incident in the hallway spread through the courthouse like wildfire. During the mid-morning recess, Lisa stepped outside the courtroom and saw clusters of people whispering in the corridor. She caught fragments of conversations. "Did you hear what happened to Judge Torres? That new officer is done. Completely done. I can't believe he actually pushed her. She's probably in there right now calling the police chief, but that's not what Judge Torres was doing." During the 15-minute break, she stayed in the courtroom reviewing exhibits for the afternoon session. She sipped water from a plastic bottle and made notes on a legal pad. When the bailiff came in to ask if she needed anything, she simply thanked him and asked him to bring the jury back in 5 minutes. The trial continued through the lunch recess. The case was complicated, involving spreadsheets and financial records that would make most people's eyes glaze over. But Judge Torres kept everything moving. She rephrased confusing questions so the jury could understand them. She maintained order when the defendants started whispering too loudly among themselves. She gave both sides equal time and equal respect. Lisa found herself fascinated by the judge's complete focus. Here was someone who'd been disrespected and physically assaulted just hours ago, and she was acting like it never happened. Not because she was pretending it didn't matter, but because she had a job to do and people depending on her to do it right. Around 2 in the afternoon, Lisa finally had to leave for her own testimony. As she stood up to go, she caught Judge Torres glancing in her direction. Their eyes met for just a second. The judge gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable, and then returned her attention to the witness on the stand. In the courthouse administrative offices on the first floor, things were not calm. Officer Thompson sat in a hard plastic chair outside the security supervisor's office. He'd been there for 2 hours. His sergeant had filed an incident report. The courthouse security chief had been notified. The police department's internal affairs division had been called. Thompson's hands had finally stopped shaking, but his stomach felt like it was full of rocks. He kept replaying the moment in his head, the way he'd reached out, the way he'd pushed her, the complete certainty he'd felt that he was right, followed by the crushing realization that he'd been so very wrong. He'd been at this assignment for exactly 4 days. Before that, he'd worked patrol in the Southern District. The sergeant who'd given him the courthouse assignment had told him it was easy duty. Just check IDs, watch for anyone trying to bring in weapons or contraband, and keep the peace. The sergeant had given him a quick tour of the building and shown him a printed list of all the judges' names and their courtroom assignments. But the sergeant hadn't shown him photos. Hadn't explained that judges sometimes arrived through the public entrance. Hadn't prepared him for what to do when someone insisted on entering a closed courtroom. Thompson had panicked. He'd felt his authority being challenged, and he'd reacted the way he'd been trained to react on the street. With physical force, with dominance, with a complete failure to assess the actual situation. Now he sat waiting to learn his fate. Would he be fired? Suspended? Prosecuted? He'd technically committed assault, even if he'd thought he was doing his job. The fact that his victim was a federal judge made it infinitely worse. The door to the security chief's office opened. A woman in a business suit stepped out, followed by Thompson's sergeant and the security chief himself. "Officer Thompson," the security chief said. "Come inside, please." Thompson stood on legs that felt like rubber. He followed them into the office. The woman in the suit introduced herself as someone from the police department's internal affairs division. She had a folder in her hands already thick with papers. "Officer Thompson, you understand why you're here?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, I do. You've been involved in an incident with Judge Rebecca Torres. We've reviewed the security footage from the hallway. We've taken statements from multiple witnesses. Before we proceed, I need to ask you, do you want to have a union representative present for this conversation?" Thompson thought about it. He probably should. But what was the point? He'd done what he'd done. Everyone had seen it. The cameras had recorded it. No, ma'am. I don't need a representative. I take full responsibility for my actions. The woman opened her folder. All right, then. Let's start from the beginning. Tell me exactly what happened this morning. As Thompson began to explain, trying to put into words how everything had gone so wrong so fast, Judge Torres was wrapping up her day in court. The jury had heard from 5 witnesses. Both sides had presented strong arguments. The trial would continue tomorrow. This court stands adjourned until 9 a.m., Judge Torres announced, tapping her gavel once. As people filed out of the courtroom, the judge gathered her materials. The bailiff approached her quietly. Your Honor, the administrative office has been trying to reach you. They'd like to know if you want to press charges against Officer Thompson. Judge Torres looked up from her papers. For the first time all day, her expression shifted slightly. Not to anger, but to something that looked like deep thought. Tell them I'll come down after I finish my case notes, probably in about an hour. Yes, Your Honor. The bailiff left and Judge Torres sat alone in her courtroom. The building was quieter now as people headed home for the day. She stared at the empty jury box for a long moment, then returned to her notes. Whatever happened next would set a precedent, not just for Officer Thompson, but for how people in power responded when they were wronged by people with less power. The whole courthouse would be watching to see what kind of judge Rebecca Torres really was. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, the story had spread beyond the courthouse. Local news stations had picked it up. Someone had leaked it to a reporter who'd been covering the corruption trial. Within an hour, it was trending on social media. Videos that people had recorded on their phones started appearing online, showing the moment Officer Thompson pushed Judge Torres in the hallway. The police department's public relations office was flooded with calls. Should the officer be arrested? Why wasn't he fired immediately? What kind of training did these officers receive? The questions kept coming and nobody had good answers yet. In his small apartment across town, Officer Thompson sat on his couch staring at his phone. His sergeant had sent him home after the interview with Internal Affairs. Told him not to come back until he heard from the department. Thompson's girlfriend kept asking him what was wrong, but he couldn't bring himself to explain. How could he tell her that he'd destroyed his career in a single moment of stupidity? He scrolled through social media and felt sick. People were calling him a bully, a thug. Some said he was clearly on a power trip. Others claimed this proved police officers couldn't be trusted. A few people defended him, saying he was just doing his job, but those voices were drowned out by the angry ones. Thompson put his phone down and covered his face with his hands. He'd become a police officer because he wanted to help people. He'd grown up in a rough neighborhood where he'd seen what happened when there was no law and order. He'd wanted to be different, to be one of the good ones. And now this. Back at the courthouse, Judge Torres finally finished her case notes around 6 in the evening. The building was mostly empty now. The janitors had started their rounds, pushing their carts down the marble hallways. The usual noise and chaos had been replaced by an almost peaceful quiet. She gathered her things and walked downstairs to the administrative offices. The security chief was still there, along with the woman from Internal Affairs and the courthouse administrator, a stern-looking man named Gerald, who'd worked in the judicial system for 30 years. Judge Torres, Gerald said, standing up when she entered. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. I know it's been a long day. It has, she agreed, taking a seat across from them, but this needed to be addressed. The woman from Internal Affairs opened her folder again. Your Honor, we've completed our preliminary investigation. We have the security footage, witness statements, and Officer Thompson's account of the incident. We need to know how you'd like to proceed. Do you want to press charges for assault? Judge Torres was quiet for a moment. She looked at each person in the room, then down at her hands. When she spoke, her voice. He was measured and calm. Tell me about Officer Thompson. How long has he been with the department? The Internal Affairs investigator checked her notes. He graduated from the academy 8 months ago. He's been on patrol since then. This was his 4th day assigned to courthouse security. 4th day, Judge Torres repeated. And what training did he receive for this assignment? The security chief shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He got a standard orientation. We showed him the layout of the building, explained the security protocols, gave him a list of all the judges and their courtrooms. Did you show him photographs of the judges? There was a pause. The security chief glanced at Gerald, then back at the judge. No, Your Honor, we don't typically do that. Most officers learn to recognize the judges over time. Over time, Judge Torres said. But Officer Thompson didn't have time, did he? He had 4 days. The woman from Internal Affairs leaned forward. Your Honor, with respect, the training issue doesn't excuse what happened. Officer Thompson used unnecessary force. He put his hands on you and pushed you. That's assault, regardless of whether he knew who you were. You're absolutely right, Judge Torres said. It was assault. It was also poor judgment, inadequate training, and a failure of supervision. But let me ask you something. If Officer Thompson had done the same thing to an attorney, would we be having this conversation? The room went silent. Everyone knew the answer. If Thompson had pushed a regular attorney, there might have been a complaint, maybe a reprimand, but the full weight of the department's Internal Affairs Division wouldn't have come down on him within hours. The reason this feels so serious, Judge Torres continued, isn't just because of what he did. It's because of who I am. Because I'm a judge, his actions are seen as an attack on the entire judicial system, and maybe they are. But I keep thinking about something. What if this is an opportunity? Gerald, the courthouse administrator, looked confused. An opportunity, Your Honor? An opportunity to fix a broken system instead of just punishing one person for being broken by it. Judge Torres pulled a notepad from her briefcase. I've been thinking about this all day. Officer Thompson made a terrible mistake, but he's not the only problem here. Our training is inadequate. Our protocols are unclear. We set these young officers up to fail, and then we act surprised when they do. The Internal Affairs investigator shook her head. Your Honor, I understand what you're saying, but there have to be consequences. If we don't discipline Officer Thompson appropriately, it sends a message that this behavior is acceptable. I'm not suggesting there shouldn't be consequences, Judge Torres replied. I'm suggesting the consequences should be meaningful. Firing him accomplishes nothing except destroying one person's career. It doesn't fix the training problem. It doesn't help the next young officer who finds himself in over his head. She opened her notepad and showed them what she'd been writing during her breaks in court. It was a detailed proposal for reforming courthouse security training. Mandatory photo identification training for all judges and court personnel, shadowing requirements for new officers, clear escalation protocols, regular refresher courses. This is what I want, she said. I want Officer Thompson formally reprimanded. I want it on his permanent record that he used inappropriate force. But I also want him retrained properly, and then I want him to help develop and teach the new training program. Who better to explain what can go wrong than someone who experienced it firsthand? The 3 officials looked at each other, then back at the judge. The woman from Internal Affairs spoke first. Your Honor, this is highly unusual. Most judges in your position would want the officer prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Maybe, Judge Torres said, but I'm not most judges. I spent 10 years as a public defender before I took the bench. I've seen what happens when we treat every mistake as irredeemable. We create a system based on punishment instead of growth. Officer Thompson humiliated me in front of a courthouse full of people. That video is probably going to follow me around for years, but destroying his life doesn't undo any of that. Making sure it doesn't happen to the next judge, that actually accomplishes something. Gerald, who'd been quiet throughout the discussion, finally spoke up. The media is going to have a field day with this. They're going to say we're going soft on police misconduct. Let them, Judge Torres said. I'll do a press conference if necessary. I'll explain my reasoning. People might not agree with it, but at least they'll understand that this wasn't about protecting bad behavior. It was about preventing it in the future. The meeting continued for another hour. They discussed the specifics of Thompson's reprimand, the timeline for developing the new training program, and how to present the decision to the public. By the time they finished, it was nearly 8 o'clock at night. As Judge Torres walked to her car in the parking garage, she felt the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with her. Her shoulders ached. Her feet hurt from standing in her courtroom all day. But she also felt something else. A sense of purpose, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from this awful situation. She didn't know yet whether Officer Thompson would accept her proposal. She didn't know if he even wanted to remain a police officer after what had happened. But she'd given him a chance. Sometimes that's all anyone really needs. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the bailiff, Bill. Judge, I just wanted to say thank you for how you handled today. You showed real class. See you tomorrow. She smiled and typed back a quick reply. Then she drove home through the quiet city streets, already thinking about the corruption trial that would resume in the morning. Whatever happened with Officer Thompson, she still had a job to do, and she intended to do it well. The next morning, Officer Thompson received a call from his sergeant at 7:30. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Judge Torres stumbling backward in that hallway. He heard the gasps from the crowd. He felt the shame burning through him all over again. "Thompson, you need to come to the station," his sergeant said. "The chief wants to see you at 9. Thompson's stomach dropped. This was it. He was getting fired. Maybe even arrested. He got dressed slowly, his hands shaking as he buttoned his uniform shirt. His girlfriend hugged him at the door and told him it would be okay, but they both knew she was just trying to be supportive. Nothing about this situation was okay. The police station was buzzing when he arrived. Other officers looked at him as he walked through the building. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked angry, like he'd embarrassed the entire department. Nobody said anything directly to him, but he could feel their judgment with every step. The chief's office was on the 3rd floor. Thompson had only been in there once before, during his graduation ceremony from the academy. Back then, the chief had shaken his hand and welcomed him to the force. Today would be different. His sergeant was already there, along with a lieutenant Thompson didn't recognize and a woman from the union. They all stood when he entered. The chief, a veteran cop with 28 years on the job, gestured to an empty chair. "Sit down, Thompson." He sat. His mouth was dry. His heart pounded so hard he thought everyone could probably hear it. The chief opened a folder on his desk. "I've reviewed the incident report. I've watched the security footage. I've read the witness statements. What you did yesterday was unacceptable. You understand that?" "Yes, sir, completely. You put your hands on a federal judge. You used force when no force was necessary. You created a situation that made this entire department look bad on the evening news and all over social media." The chief's voice was stern, but not as angry as Thompson had expected. "Under normal circumstances, you'd be suspended without pay pending a full investigation. Depending on the outcome, you'd likely be terminated." Thompson's stomach twisted. "Here it comes." "However," the chief continued, "Judge Torres has made a request that I need to discuss with you." Thompson looked up, confused. "Sir?" The chief leaned back in his chair. "Judge Torres doesn't want to press charges. She also doesn't want you fired. Instead, she's proposed something different, something I've never seen in my entire career." For the next 10 minutes, the chief explained Judge Torres's proposal. The formal reprimand, the mandatory retraining, the involvement in developing new training materials, the opportunity to turn his mistake into something that could help other officers avoid the same situation. Thompson sat there in stunned silence. He'd expected anger, punishment, the end of his career. He hadn't expected mercy. He certainly hadn't expected the person he'd wronged to be the one offering him a way forward. "Why would she do that?" he finally asked. "I humiliated her. That video is everywhere. Why would she give me a second chance?" The sergeant spoke up. "I asked her the same thing. She said something about how the system fails when we only know how to punish instead of teach. She thinks you can be better. Question is, do you?" Thompson thought about his reasons for becoming a cop. The neighborhood kids he'd wanted to help. The difference he'd hoped to make. All of that felt impossibly far away now, buried under the weight of his mistake. "I don't know if I deserve a second chance," he said quietly. "But if Judge Torres thinks I can be better, then I want to try. I want to make this right." The chief nodded. "Then here's what's going to happen. You'll receive a formal reprimand that goes in your permanent file. You'll complete a comprehensive retraining program that we're developing specifically for courthouse security, and you'll work with the training division to create materials that will help every officer who comes after you. This isn't a light punishment, Thompson. This is going to be hard work. Are you willing to do it?" "Yes, sir, absolutely." "Good, because there's one more thing." The chief closed the folder. "Judge Torres wants to meet with you, face to face, today." Thompson felt like he might be sick. Facing her again after what he'd done seemed impossible, but he knew he had to. He owed her that much at minimum. "When?" he asked. 1 o'clock. Her chambers at the courthouse. "Don't be late." The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Thompson went home and changed out of his uniform. He couldn't wear it to meet with the judge, not after what had happened. He put on a simple button-down shirt and khaki pants. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. At 12:30, he drove to the courthouse, the same building where everything had fallen apart yesterday. The security guards at the entrance recognized him immediately. One of them gave him a hard look but waved him through after checking his ID. He took the elevator to the 3rd floor and found Judge Torres's chambers. The door was closed. A small brass nameplate read, "The Honorable Rebecca Torres." He stood there for a full minute trying to work up the courage to knock. Finally, he did. "3 soft taps, come in," her voice called from inside. Thompson opened the door. The chambers were smaller than he'd expected. Bookshelves lined the walls filled with legal volumes and case files. A large desk sat near the window. Judge Torres stood beside it, no longer wearing her robe. She looked somehow more human in regular clothes, a simple blouse and slacks. "Officer Thompson," she said. "Thank you for coming. Please sit down." He sat in one of the chairs across from her desk. She sat too, not behind the desk but in the chair next to him. It felt deliberate, like she was trying to put them on equal footing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Thompson couldn't find the words. Everything he'd rehearsed on the drive over suddenly seemed inadequate. "I'm sorry," he finally managed. "I'm so incredibly sorry for what I did. There's no excuse for it. I was overwhelmed and confused and I made a terrible decision. I put my hands on you. I disrespected you. I failed at every part of my job. And I'm sorry." Judge Torres listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "I believe you," she said, "and I appreciate your apology. But I want you to understand something. I didn't make this proposal because I think what you did was okay. I made it because I've spent enough time in courtrooms to know that people are more than their worst moments." She leaned forward slightly. "Officer Thompson, can I tell you a story?" He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "When I was a public defender, fresh out of law school, I had a case involving a young man about your age. He'd gotten into a fight outside a bar and seriously hurt someone. It was his first offense." He was terrified. "And when I met with him, all he could talk about was how his life was over, how he'd thrown everything away in one moment of poor judgment." Judge Torres paused, remembering. "I helped get him into a diversion program, anger management, community service, restorative justice meetings with the victim. It was hard work. But you know what? He completed everything, made amends, changed his life. Last I heard, he was working as a counselor helping other young people avoid the same mistakes he made." She looked directly at Thompson. "That case taught me something important. Sometimes the best thing we can do for someone who makes a mistake isn't to destroy them. It's to give them the tools to become better. That's what I'm offering you." Thompson felt tears welling up in his eyes. He blinked them back. "I don't understand why you're being so kind to me." "I'm not being kind," Judge Torres said firmly. "I'm being strategic. Right now, there's a young officer somewhere in this city who's going to face a confusing situation, maybe in a courthouse, maybe somewhere else. And when that happens, I want them to have better training than you received. I want them to have better protocols. I want them to know what to do so they don't make the same mistake you made. You can help make that happen." She stood up and walked to her bookshelf, pulling down a thick binder. "This is the current training manual for courthouse security. It's outdated and inadequate. I want you to help rewrite it. I want you to share your experience so other officers can learn from it." "Can you do that?" Thompson stood as well. "Yes, Your Honor, I can do that." "Good." She handed him the binder. "You'll start your retraining next week. In the meantime, read through this. Make notes about what was missing, what was unclear, what could have prevented what happened yesterday. We'll meet again in 2 weeks to discuss your progress." As Thompson turned to leave, Judge Torres called after him. "Officer Thompson?" One more thing, he stopped and looked back. "The path forward isn't going to be easy. People are going to question my decision. They're going to question whether you deserve this chance. Some days you're probably going to question it yourself. But I want you to remember something. I'm not giving you this opportunity because I think you're perfect. I'm giving it to you because I think you're capable of growth. Don't prove me wrong." Thompson nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He left her chambers carrying the heavy binder, feeling lighter somehow than he had in 24 hours. 6 months later, Officer Thompson stood in front of a classroom filled with 20 new police recruits. The training facility was modern, with white walls and rows of desks facing a large screen at the front. Thompson had been in a room just like this not long ago, sitting where these recruits were sitting now, believing he had all the answers. He clicked the remote in his hand and the screen lit up with a single image. It was a still frame from the security camera footage, him, Judge Torres, the moment right before he made the worst decision of his career. "This is me," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves churning in his stomach. "6 months ago on my 4th day of courthouse security duty. And this is the moment right before I destroyed my career, humiliated a federal judge, and became a viral video that probably still shows up if you search my name online." The recruits shifted in their seats. A few looked uncomfortable. They'd all heard about what happened. The story had become something of a legend in the department. "I'm not here to make excuses," Thompson continued. "I'm here to make sure none of you repeat my mistakes. Because what I did that day wasn't just wrong. It was preventable. And that's what we're going to talk about today." For the next hour, Thompson walked them through everything. The inadequate training he'd received, the confusion he'd felt, the panic that had set in when he thought his authority was being challenged, the split second when he'd chosen to use force instead of taking a breath and thinking clearly. He showed them the new protocols that had been developed. How to properly verify someone's identity, when to call for backup instead of handling a situation alone, the importance of staying calm even when you feel overwhelmed. He'd helped write every word of the training manual, pouring 6 months of hard work and reflection into making sure it was actually useful. A recruit in the back row raised her hand. "Officer Thompson, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why didn't Judge Torres just have you fired? I mean, if someone did that to me, I'd want them gone." Thompson nodded. He'd been asked this question dozens of times over the past months. "I asked her the same thing. She told me that punishment without growth doesn't fix broken systems. She could have ended my career, and maybe I deserved that. But instead, she gave me a chance to turn the worst moment of my life into something that could help people. That's real leadership." He clicked to the next slide. It showed the new identification system that had been implemented at the courthouse. Every judge, attorney, and staff member now had updated ID badges with photos. There were photo displays at every security checkpoint. New officers shadowed experienced ones for 2 full weeks before working alone. "These changes didn't exist 6 months ago," Thompson said. "They exist now because Judge Torres pushed for them, because she understood that I wasn't the only problem. The system was broken. We just fixed one piece of it." After the class ended, Thompson packed up his materials. The training supervisor, a veteran cop named Rodriguez, approached him. "Good work today, Thompson. The recruits really listened to you. There's something powerful about hearing from someone who's actually been through it." "Thank you, sir. I just hope it makes a difference." "It already has. We haven't had a single incident at the courthouse since the new protocols were implemented. That's 6 months of smooth operations. That's because of the work you and Judge Torres did together." Thompson drove to the courthouse after leaving the training facility. He had a meeting scheduled with Judge Torres to review the latest training materials. These meetings had become routine over the past months. At first they'd been awkward and tense, but gradually something had shifted. They'd developed a working relationship built on mutual respect and a shared goal. He checked in at security, and the guards greeted him by name. They'd all heard his presentations about the new protocols. Some of them had even told him privately that the training had helped them handle difficult situations better. Judge Torres's chamber's door was open. She looked up from her desk when he knocked. "Officer Thompson, come in. How did the training session go?" "Really well, I think." The recruits asked good questions. They seemed engaged. "Excellent," she gestured to the chair across from her desk. The same chair where he'd sat 6 months ago expecting his life to be over. "I wanted to talk to you about something. The State Police Academy has asked if we'd be willing to share our training program with them. They want to implement similar protocols at courthouses across the state." Thompson's eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Seriously. Your story, as difficult as it was, has resonated with people. Other departments want to learn from what happened here. They want to prevent similar incidents in their jurisdictions." She pulled out a folder and handed it to him. "They're inviting us to present at a statewide conference next month. Law enforcement and judicial officials from every county. It would be both of us presenting together. Are you interested?" Thompson took the folder, feeling the weight of what she was offering. "You want me to stand in front of hundreds of police officers and judges and tell them about the worst thing I've ever done? I want you to stand in front of them and tell them how you made it right," Judge Torres corrected. "There's a difference." He opened the folder and scanned the invitation. It was real. This was really happening. I'll do it, he said. If you think I'm ready, I know you're ready. The question is, do you know it? Over the next month, they prepared the presentation together. Thompson wrote about his experience from an officer's perspective. Judge Torres added her insights about judicial expectations and the importance of accountability. They practiced their delivery, making sure the message was clear and impactful. The night before the conference, Thompson couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about standing in front of all those people. Would they see him as an example of redemption, or just as the cop who'd messed up? Would his story actually help anyone, or would it just be a cautionary tale? The conference was held in a large hotel downtown. When Thompson and Judge Torres arrived, the ballroom was already filling up. Hundreds of people in uniform and business attire filled the seats. The energy in the room was intense. They were the keynote speakers. When they walked onto the stage, Thompson felt his heart pounding. But then he looked at Judge Torres, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. He thought about all the work they'd done, all the hours spent rewriting protocols and developing training materials, all the recruits who'd already benefited from what they'd created together. He stepped up to the microphone. 6 months ago, I made a mistake that should have ended my career, he began. I used unnecessary force against someone I was supposed to protect. That person happened to be Judge Rebecca Torres, who's standing beside me today. What happened next changed my understanding of justice, accountability, and what it means to be a police officer. For the next 45 minutes, they told their story. The incident, the aftermath, the decision to focus on systemic change instead of individual punishment, the development of new training protocols, the results they'd seen in their courthouse. Judge Torres spoke about the importance of judges and law enforcement working together as partners rather than adversaries. She talked about how the justice system fails when it only knows how to punish and succeeds when it creates opportunities for growth. When they finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet, applauding. After the presentation, dozens of people approached them with questions. Chiefs wanted to know about implementation. Judges wanted copies of the training materials. Young officers thanked Thompson for his honesty. One older sergeant pulled Thompson aside. Son, I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've seen a lot of officers make mistakes. Most of them never recover. The fact that you're standing here helping others, that takes real courage. Your department is lucky to have you. As they drove back to the courthouse that afternoon, Judge Torres turned to Thompson. You did well today. You should be proud of yourself. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Thompson said. You gave me a chance when you had every reason not to. I'll spend the rest of my career trying to live up to that. You already are, she replied. The Thompson who pushed me in that hallway 6 months ago isn't the same person sitting in this car. Growth isn't about erasing our mistakes. It's about learning from them and using that knowledge to become better. 3 months later, Thompson received a promotion to the training division. His new job was to travel to different precincts across the state, teaching the protocols he'd helped develop. He'd tell his story hundreds more times, each time hoping it would help at least one officer make a better choice than he had. Judge Torres continued her work on the bench, presiding over cases with the same fairness and wisdom she'd always shown. The corruption trial she'd been handling that day had resulted in convictions. Justice had been served as it should be. Occasionally, their paths would cross in the courthouse hallways. Thompson would nod respectfully. Judge Torres would nod back. No words were needed. They both understood what they'd built together from the wreckage of one terrible moment. The viral video still existed online. People still watched it. But now when they searched for the story, they found something else too. Articles about the training program. Interviews about restorative justice. Stories about how one mistake had led to meaningful change. Officer Thompson had learned that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can become the most important ones. Not because of what we did wrong, but because of what we chose to do afterward. Judge Torres had taught him that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about transformation, second chances, and the courage to believe that people can become better than their worst decisions. And in a courthouse that had seen thousands of cases about right and wrong, their story had proven something profound. Sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't revenge, it's redemption.